So welcome to 90 in 90. This is Amanda O'Shea from the Serendipity Experience, and I have with me is Philippe Bartu from Malaysia. And Philippe, it's really funny that when I see your name, I always want to give it a little French twist, like Philippe. That's just... What should we call you?
I have a weird spelling on my name. The IPPE just throws people off. So I have it's quite common. People call me Philippe. I'm really not bothered anymore. Like whatever people do. I call myself Philip because it sounds a bit weird to say Philippe when I'm speaking English. But
right. Yeah. And when you're speaking French, do you?
Then it's Philippe. Yeah, when I'm speaking French. Yeah.
Oh, but you're all over. You are in Malaysia.
I'm now in Malaysia.
Yeah. So it's very early morning here for me, and it's afternoon for you, I guess. Is that?
2 p.m. in the afternoon.
2 p.m. in the afternoon. So good mornings, good afternoons, or wherever anybody listening to this is, whatever time of day you're listening to this, welcome. So it's really lovely to just catch up with you again. And I can't remember the last time that I actually saw you, but because of sort of, we've had a few conversations. But I remember attending one of your retreats up in Barcelona a couple of years ago, maybe, was that?
Yeah, it's been 2 years now.
Yeah, and before that, I have great memories of you flying me around the dance floor at one of the Viva events. And I've never forgotten that. You're a great dancer.
Thank you. Well, that was
fun. It was. Yeah, we've got Viva coming up in about 4 weeks. So yeah, so that will be good. I'm guessing you won't be here, seeing as you are over there in Asia. What are your plans?
Oh, probably not. No, I won't. Well, I won't be making it to Spain. I'll probably be here for the next couple of months or so at least. Yeah.
Great. So, I mean, you've been, you're a traveling man. Hey, you've been, I know you've lived in Spain recently. You've lived in Barcelona. That's where I used to listen to you on the radio. And you've been doing a bit of a trip. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and where you're going? And I love the title. I love the title that you've given, this experimenting with surrender. So I'm very curious to know more about that.
Well, have you read the book, The Surrender Experiment?
No, I've read, that's Michael Singer, isn't it? Is that his name? Singer. I've read The Untethered Soul.
Okay. So I came across The Surrender Experiment about 2 or 3 years ago, and I remember reading it and just being really impacted by that way of living. And I said to myself, this is what I'm going to do. Well, I guess I can't really say this is what I did, but I've been dipping in and out of experimenting with surrender for the last 2-3 years. And I think more and more in the last 6 months. And so I really didn't want to be traveling so much. I actually went to Spain. I went to Barcelona because I was kind of tired of all the traveling and I just wanted to settle down and live in this beautiful city that I fell in love with. So I arrived like 2 years ago, and what I find amazing is there is something really magical about surrendering. And what that means to me is when I have an idea of how I would like my life to be. I have an idea of how my perfect life would look like. And then life happens. And there's like a big gap between that. Coming to Barcelona for me was like, oh, great. I want to settle down. I want to have a place. I want some stability. I want a home. I'm tired of all this traveling. And I ended up staying in Barcelona for 2 years, which is the longest I've stayed in the last 15 years anywhere. And I fell in love with a girl from Guatemala called Christina. Ooh. We got married this year in March, moved back to Barcelona. And I had such an amazing time in Guatemala, and just being in nature just felt so right. And I came back to Barcelona, and I remember walking in my apartment and just feeling so at home, feeling so comfortable, and just like how wonderful it is to have a home again, because we'd been away for about 3 or 4 months. And the second day we had come back, I was sitting in my living room, and something felt off. Something felt like this is no longer where I'm meant to be. And I had we had been in Bali in May that year, and for some reason it was like I want to go back to Bali, and it wasn't like I want to go back to Bali, but I had a like feeling, when you feel just called for something.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like I just felt like a calling to go to Bali, and Christina felt the same, and it was really very clear for us, but we had all the reasons why it wasn't a good idea, it wasn't the right time, and all of that. So it wasn't so much that actually I didn't want to go to Bali. I would have been very comfortable to just stay in Barcelona and just kind of settle down a little. And to me, surrendering is about, as best as I can, to let go of my personal preference and to allow myself to step into where I feel pulled. So I didn't go to Bali because I had this dream, like that kind of came later. I had this kind of dream of something I want to create, a beautiful space I want to create in Bali, but it was just a pull. So more and more I've been experimenting with listening to that pull. And it's scary. And it is full of uncertainty and full of not knowing. And I think it's been the most in the last sort of 3 to 6 months, because what happened is we left Barcelona. We're like, all right, we're moving out, and we sold all our stuff, rented out the apartment, and moved, and we're ready to fly to Switzerland. Well, we flew to Switzerland, and the next day we were going to go to Bali. Now, the day before flying to Bali, Christina came to join me, and I took her out for dinner. And she said to me, "You're going to be a father." And I was like, "What?" And I found out that she's pregnant, and she was just, she was, at that time, she was just 4 weeks pregnant. And we had flights the next day to Bali, and she didn't want to fly. And so there was also this whole conversation, like, do we fly, do we not fly? And so that evening we were like, as much as we were really excited, it was like, holy shit, we really want to go to Bali now that you're pregnant and all of that. And so again, it's not always easy to surrender, because there's so much that gets in the way. So we did, actually just about 6 hours before we decided we're going to go. So we went to Bali, and then once we were there, it just, well, everything changed, and everything started to look different. And it's just our needs were very, very different. And so when just being in Bali was, when we were there in May, it was like amazing and magical experience. We went back, and it was just a real challenge. Just because Christina became much more sensitive to noise and smells and everything. And so surrendering has just been like, just finding the okayness in all of that, and still following, and still letting yourself be guided, and still being okay with not knowing what the hell are we doing here, why are we here. And so we did that. And I felt like it felt like, when you're really positive about things, and you try to look at things from the positive side.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
So we kind of did that. And then one morning I woke up and I was like, this is bullshit. This isn't working. like we couldn't find a home. Everything just started to feel like it was a real struggle. And so we didn't stay for long. We ended up, after 6 weeks, we just moved here to Malaysia, and this is where we are now, and we're planning to go back to Switzerland, where she wants to give birth. So our baby's due on the 5th of April. So it hasn't really been announced yet on social media or on Facebook or anything. So it
will be now.
So I spoke to Christina, and I said, "Hey, is it okay if I can share this?" And so she's delighted. She's really cool.
I'm so happy for you. That's amazing news. That's
Thank you.
amazing. A huge congratulations. It's funny you said that because I was just like, oh my goodness, I missed that. Like I didn't know that you guys are having a
Well, no,
baby.
yeah. Well, not many people know, and I just felt like that was, yeah, that was just kind of really an important part of the puzzle here, like why we left. It was,
Right. Yeah.
um, and I remember for me, like it hasn't really hit me that I'm going to be a father,
Wow.
and I'm wondering. I know you're a mother. How was it for you the moment you found out you were going to be mother?
Well, it's really interesting actually because when I in a way there's a lot of similarities, because
Yeah,
just going back, I remember when I first met you, you came to Javier and you just left Ibiza, or you were living in Ibiza and you didn't know where you were
yeah,
going, and then you were off somewhere else. I met you through Marina Pearson, and then you were somewhere else, and then you were somewhere else, and then I was with you in Barcelona when you had just met Christina, and I went for dinner with you, and Christina's parents came, and you met
Oh,
Christina's parents for the first night, and we were there. That was the first time you met her parents, right?
that was the first time we met. Yeah,
And I tell you why it sticks in my memory so much, because it was when all the riots were happening in Barcelona. It was like we were north of Barcelona on this retreat in this beautiful waterside, um, like with
yeah,
Jackie Ford and
yeah.
those guys.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
yeah,
And so I remember. So watching yours and Christine, and then watching your story was really cool, because I remember just being there. And it was just, I didn't even know that you two were together. I didn't, it was just like a friend that you brought along. It was early days.
just met 3 weeks before that
Yeah,
retreat.
yeah, yeah. So I wasn't sure, like, is she a girlfriend or just a friend? So I remember your story, and that here, there, and everywhere. And so for me, my story was in a way a little bit similar. That, I mean, I've lived in Javier now for 13 years, Philip, but before then I was traveling for 9 years. I'd left West London, which is where I was sort of, where I grew up. And I was like you, here, there, and everywhere, and done all my travelings. And I was living in Hong Kong, and I was, oh, that's my alarm. And I was living in Hong Kong, and um, I found out I was pregnant there in a relationship that I hadn't been in for very long. And I had been away and I hadn't lived in the UK for so many years. So it was also this big kind of like, oh my goodness, like, what am I going to do? Where are we going to go? And then the father of my children, he's from West London too. And he was on a kind of round the world little trip, and he kind of got caught at first base. So that was like, and his next stop was Bali, and then
No,
he had a ticket to Australia, and so I decided I didn't want to have the baby in Hong Kong. I'd been living there for a year or so. That definitely didn't feel right, and I didn't want to go to Bali. Fun enough, I'd been there years. I'd been to Bali on my travels years
yeah,
ago. So I flew to Australia. I was like, well, you've got this once around the world, this ticket, and you're,
mm,
going to have a baby. So, so we need to kind of, yeah, this is sort of, and I had this, I just didn't know where I wanted to be. And I didn't really want to be in the UK. And so I had to, he went and had like 3 nights in Bali by himself or something. I flew up to Cairns, and I met him in Cairns. And then I think I was putting off going back to the
yeah,
UK. So his father at the time was living in South Africa. So we did this trip down, like drove down, and I was exactly the same. I remember that, this whole flying, like long distance flying and being pregnant and all of that stuff. And and then did the big trip where we drove down the coast of Australia down to Sydney, and we went from Sydney to South Africa, and we had a plan that to maybe, I don't know, stay in South Africa because his dad was there. And then we got to South Africa, and then that didn't seem to be really part of his dad's plan,
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and it was, so by the time I ended up coming back to London, I was late into the system, and already there was showing like signs of like, I don't really know if this is like, nothing kind of went how it was, if you like, nothing went how my romantic idyllic idea had been about falling in love and getting
Mm,
married and having a baby and all that stuff. None of that happened at all.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a shock for me, but I fully, like, I was like, all of a sudden this baby was the most important sort of thing to me.
Yeah.
But it was bit, you know, I remember for Johnny, that was like, it was the responsibility, I think, and the whole change of plan and this ready-made family suddenly. And, you know, that was such a really, really weird time, actually, for me and for him. And it's funny because just before that, I think when I look at the standard kind of falling in love and get whatever, people get engaged, or they date and then they get engaged and then they, you know, maybe, I don't know, get a home and live together and then get married. And it wasn't like that for me. I'd gone through the most vulnerable, lonely time I'd ever had in my life living in Hong Kong. I was living on Lamma Island.
Oh, yeah.
And
Very isolated, yeah.
yeah, and then I sort of met, you know, then I sort of, yeah, entered into a relationship and I felt pregnant. It was like, so, like, talk about not being prepared for
Yeah.
what's coming next. But you know what? Something happened, and now Charlie, who I was pregnant with then, is 23 years old and has just graduated from university. And so there's been this huge story, and it's very similar to you. I'd never been able to settle. I'd never lived anywhere for longer than 2 years. So to look back on that now is just, you know, talk about, there was a point where you had to listen to, you're kind of like, well, what am I going to do next? And I remember like getting back to London, and the situation was all a bit strange. And I ended up from being this person who was traveling around like you, around Asia, and I'd done the cruise ships, and I'd done Europe, and I'd done loads of different things. And then I ended up in a bed and breakfast in Willesden, like pregnant, like homeless. I mean, it was like none of that was ever in the plan. You know, I'd been like, you know, it'd been a big kind of experiment with all sorts of stuff, with, you know, and with like fun-filled times and, you know, experiences with all sorts of, you know, alcohol and drugs and all that sort of thing, back in the traveling day, and dancing barefoot under full moons. And next thing I'm like, you know, it's just like, it wasn't what it was. It wasn't the romantic dream that I had had since I was a little girl, I suppose. But all of that has just brought me to where I am today. So,
And yeah,
you
so
know,
when you like when you hear experimenting with surrender, like what does that mean to you?
well, what I really see, and I'm really grateful for the kind of the understanding that we share, you know, about sort of how life works, is that I see that the suffering that I experienced and I did in that whole time of moving back to London, being pregnant with somebody that I didn't really know very well, I really suffered because I suppose, things weren't going the way that I had thought or planned or wanted them to be, right? And, you know, so I spent a lot of time kind of doing like, how did I get myself into this mess? And like, you know, blah, 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 the story. So I saw that I suffered because I was trying to control something, or I wanted something to be different to the way that it was. And
Yeah,
and you know, and that is, and even with that I was positive, right? So I've always been that kind of positive
yeah,
character, like, okay, I've made my bed, I've got to lie in it, so come on. And I was a bit like, right, I better, I wanted the world to be different, and around me were happy families and, you know, like perfect couples and all of this going on. And it's so funny because I ended up from being somebody that was so in nature, right, in my traveling days, living the dream. I ended up in this sort of stressful situation, ended up having birth in a hospital, which was never my plan, a premature baby, couldn't breastfeed. Like, this whole natural chick, like, suddenly turned into this, you know, being caught up in this sort of other system. So now I see it would have been so much easier for me had I known what I know today back then,
yeah.
right? It would have been different for me, because I wouldn't have been a victim at the time to everything that was going on around me. I would have had a totally different experience of it.
Yeah.
So surrendering
Oh,
for me is handing it over.
I'm so grateful you say that, because it's reminding me about how there's just an underlying peace in everything I'm experiencing. And it doesn't
Mm.
mean that I'm always, zenned out and living in this peaceful life, but it does mean that I get caught up, I worry about things, but it just doesn't happen so often. It doesn't last so long, and I can see through it much, much more quickly. And that's such a gift. And it's so beautiful to be able to sort of go into this, because I think being a father for me right now, it's just total uncertainty. I don't know what that means, and it was. In fact, I was speaking with a client 2 days ago, and I just was a moment where actually, for the very, very first time, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to be a dad," and it was like, I don't know what it came from, but it lasted about 5 seconds. Tears running down my face. This amazing connection of love and gratitude. And then I kind of snapped out of it. I was like, whoa, I don't know what happened there, but it was almost like an angel had passed and just touched my soul at the deepest level and then went away. And just since that experience, I have been so excited and so looking forward to being a father.
Wow, that's so lovely.
Has just sort of, I don't know, some things are even hard to put into words, but it has just brought a tremendous amount of joy and excitement
But
to.
there is something about, for me, there's no better. I'm so loving this conversation, because just even to be the listener to such news is like, wow, the whole system is working perfectly. We talk a
Yeah,
lot about our thinking system, and all the systems that are in place for us being human and having the human experience, is that this is what happens. We reproduce.
yeah,
And so that system works and it doesn't always work. Let's just say, there's a plan, and there's a blueprint, and there's a design to every system. And then
mm-hmm.
sometimes things go a little bit tweaky and a little bit here. And, my son was born pregnant.
Tits up.
Sometimes the shit just hits the fan, right? And I remember when all that time, when I was pregnant with Charlie, it was so huge because it was a shock. I hadn't been home and blah, blah, blah. And then I came up positive for a Down syndrome test, and I had to have this amniocentesis, and there was a risk of miscarrying. And then Charlie was born, and that was all, a month premature and blah, blah. And then after a year, we found out Charlie had a heart disease. And so that was like something, just like his little heart has like a flap missing, and he's fine, and he's been like played like tennis at like quite a high level and all of that stuff. But all of these things that just were like, it was, and so all of that was going on. And once you're in it, right? So you're in that then, aren't you? And you're
Yeah,
in that with, okay, like I see that way back then, before I had an understanding of the principles, I had already had an understanding of, well, this is just what's happening. We've got to just roll with the punches, or we've got to roll with it. And I had an easy experience of that, funnily enough. When it was anything to do with other people, I could say, right, it's okay. Like I knew deep down that it was going to be okay, whatever. But, when I just heard you say there that you had this beautiful angelic kind of experience, like,
yes.
I'm interested to know, like, did you pull yourself back out of that?
Hard to say. I think it just happened, and it just kind of came and went, and I didn't pull myself neither in or out of it. It was just something I experienced. But as I talk about it now, I realize that it was shortly after that. I was sitting in the living room with Christina. We're here in Malaysia, and she doesn't really, we don't have any doctors here. We don't really, well, we do, but none that she really feels comfortable with. So I noticed she was getting really in her head about, oh, I need to see a doctor. I need to do some tests. I need to, and I was sat there just coming out of this angelic moment where I had like this most beautiful sort of experience, and I see her sort of kind of freaking out about, not having, and I just knew that that wasn't important for me in that moment. And I just knew that me getting sucked into that would only validate the idea that what she needs is medical care. I knew that I just knew that everything she was saying, she was just kind of caught up in her head, but I couldn't tell her that. I couldn't say, oh, it's just your thinking. I couldn't say, oh, it's so. Typically what happens is in those moments, I go into problem solving mode. So I'd be like, oh, well, let me have a look at some hospitals and maybe we can have a look and see, maybe we find a place for you to go, and then we go, right? And so I noticed myself wanting to do that because the only reason I wanted to do that is because I felt her insecurity. That was feeding on my insecurity. And it was for me to somehow, if I can find her a good doctor, then she'll be less insecure, then I can be less insecure, then the both of us can be okay. And I just saw all of that in that moment. And it was like, and I just took a deep breath and I said, we'll know when we need to know. There'll be a doctor for us. There'll be help for us when we need it. And that's all.
And it's
and it was like, I knew it. And it was almost like a whole ton of thinking just fell away for the both of us. And then it just wasn't an issue anymore. Now, it's just not about not validating that. For her, it seemed absolutely true that in that moment, she felt like she needed to see a doctor.
And how do we know that that's not coming from wisdom? How do we know that that's not wisdom talking to her? So it's about really deep listening at this stage, isn't it? Is it coming from insecurity or is it coming from wisdom?
That's so important to know. And it's also like the way that when she settled down, when she got out of her head, when she dropped sort of into a more sort of rich and deeper space, or a space of wisdom, she saw that it was no longer there. The urgency wasn't there, the need for it wasn't there, and the relax into the, oh, right now I'm okay, was there.
And that's all part of experimenting with surrendering, because it's seeing, like, if she was meant to see a doctor that day, she would have seen one. So the fact that didn't happen is like, we're back to the happening, right? We're back to,
Yeah. And if that was necessary, we would have jumped in a taxi and gone to the hospital. Like, if there was really a need for it, it would have happened.
And you wouldn't have had time to think about that. Like, I love it when we were creating. Do you remember when we were co-creating in a retreat together? Do you remember that? And I love that from I love that line that I heard from you, which was, or for you and Juan, which was, you won't make it happen. I won't make it happen. It just happens.
Yes.
And I've, for me, that's like rings so true. And that for me is a bit like experimenting with surrender. We don't have to, we're not the ones that make it happen. It happens. Like, things happen. Doctor's appointments happen. It's when we start questioning it. Oh, I feel I need to. Do we? I don't know. Well, maybe. I don't know. Well, let me have. Like, we know that that's where we're in our personal. Because otherwise, it's just like, right, I need to see a doctor, and the other person's sort of like, okay, well, like, like there's a different feel to it. There's a different feel. So we still complicate things, even having an understanding. You've got a deep understanding of the principles, and I've got my own understanding, but we still can get caught up until we realize, oh yeah, we're doing that thing again.
I got caught up for about 2 weeks in Bali. Like, regardless of the depth of my understanding of the principles, man, I was like, all over the show. I was running around like a headless chicken,
Oh, bless you.
trying to find places to stay, trying to take care of my wife who's pregnant, who I'm getting to know every day. It's like every minute, it's like, who is this person? And it's so almost like I don't know who this person is, and I'm having to rediscover her
Mm.
in a new facade, in a new way. And
Mm.
sudden, someone who was obsessed with health is now craving for some sugary cereals, you know? And I'm just like, what? It's like, are you serious? You want to eat Lucky Charms? Um, we never what is that? So for me, it was just like everything I knew about Christina just kind of threw out of the
Oh,
window.
that's so funny.
Yeah.
You know, I've been vegetarian for 7 years when I fell pregnant, and then I'm starting to eat burgers in Australia. and then when we get back to London, I've got this like craving for crispy duck pancakes, you know, like Chinese crispy duck pancakes, and
Yeah.
so it's like, and that's the thing, I think, when you know, you really like it. Just, you know what I love, what shows me it, nothing's permanent, and nothing
No.
ever was, but suddenly we feel like, oh, we've met this person, we're good together, and blah blah blah, and it's just, we are only thought in action. So, you know, the nature of thought is that it changes, and we change, and we're constantly, every cell in our body, it's all changing, and it's all imperfectly perfect.
Yeah, and when we try to get it right, you know, like so just that, like 2 days ago, she was just telling me how she just craves for comfort food and just, so she misses sort of European food. And so I was asking, well, what kind of food do you miss? She's like, you know what I really miss is just like hummus and pizza and falafel and like, you know, just like that's kind of what she was craving for. And so the next day I went out, I was like, I'm gonna surprise her, and I made her like this hummus with falafel and maybe salad and everything. And I was like, and so like I put in like all this effort to kind of make her a meal where I felt like she's gonna feel like comforted. Like we sit down and we eat this meal together. Within like 30 seconds,
Oh, I just
all of a
missed
sudden
that.
I see her within like 30 seconds, she puts the hummus in her mouth. She looks at me, and all of a sudden, she's like, projectile vomits the whole thing, runs to the toilet. And at that point, hummus all over the table, all over the. I couldn't look at hummus anymore. Like, my meal was full. I couldn't eat that anymore. I was like, I was just like, I felt like I would have thrown up just by eating hummus, and I was so looking forward to it.
I know.
So,
Welcome to fatherhood, and welcome to parenthood, and welcome for nothing ever going to plan again.
and we laughed so hard. Like, we laughed so hard. Like, the whole thing was just like a cosmic joke, you know?
Oh,
Afterwards, we ended up, I don't know, just, I don't know what she had, like pasta or something. But, you know, like, when you think that you're in control, and then you try to, you hear she wants hummus, then you make her something, and you put all the time and effort to, it all goes tits up. So that's my life right now.
wow. Philip, that is such, you know what? Wow, you've touched me, and I've had tears in my eyes and laughed, and that's just, what a lovely, lovely conversation. And I'm aware that we need to kind of call it
Yes.
a day now, but let's speak really soon. And you're going to be just an amazing father, and you know, and it's great to have people like you in the world that are bringing up children. And so my heartfelt hugest congratulations to both of you, and I'm so happy, and to all to all the grandparents and everything. So, you know, and your lovely mum, you know, who I was very fond of when I met her. And so just um enjoy all of it. Enjoy this bit. Yeah.
Thank you for the reminder.
Oh, so lots of love to you, to Christina and the family, and to the little one. And thank you for, yeah, well, you better start telling people now, or they're going to hear it on YouTube. I'll give you a couple of days grace until we post it. I'll let you know. Okay, darling, lots of love to you. Mwah. I'm so happy. What a lovely conversation. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye, darling.
Bye bye.